It's that time of year again when it gets really cold in New York. It's the you can't feel your face type of cold. It's the it's hard to breathe type of cold. It's the your Lyft and Uber and taxi budget will double type of cold. Maybe you're from somewhere tropical and have no concept of what it means to be in a really cold environment. Or maybe you're from somewhere cold like the Midwest and you're thinking, how bad could it possibly get? If you're about to enter your first winter in New York City and you think you can rough it out, believe me, eventually everybody caves. On average, the coldest it really gets in New York is in the 20s. It's true that it's not really as cold as some places in the United States, like say Minnesota, but the thing about being in New York is that you're out in the elements more than you anticipate. Most people don't drive in New York, specifically Manhattan and the areas surrounding it. So not driving means being out in the wild urban jungle, walking a lot, rain or shine, hot or cold. But that doesn't mean you have to stop your city adventures. Life keeps moving on. People go to work, they walk the dog, they do groceries. Life keeps happening. So in this video, we are going to cover 6 tips on how to survive the winter cold of New York City so you can keep living your life and you can keep New Yorking. Welcome to Urban Caffeine. My name is Thea, and on this channel, we talk about anything and everything New York City to include urban history, transit, culture, and how not to get frostbite and hypothermia in New York City. If you're a fan of staying warm, hit that like button. And if you want to continue watching videos like these, subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss future videos. So New York winters. The really cold season starts around mid-December all the way to mid-March. Some years, the cold could start earlier or later or end earlier or later. It really varies, but it's these months you are guaranteed cold weather, so be prepared. The average cold temperatures are between 20 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Then you get the wind chills, which makes the world feel 10 or 20 degrees cooler than it really is. So if it's 25 degrees out, it might feel like it's 15 degrees Fahrenheit in areas where it's extra windy or cold. And yes, New York does have microclimates, and maybe that's something we will talk about in detail in the future. So subscribe and hit that notification bell. But fear not, you will survive this cold, starting with tip number 1. Just because it's wet and snowy and really nasty out in the world doesn't mean you can't wear nice dress shoes when you go to work or other events. It's pretty common here for people to wear their snow boots to work and then change out to their dress shoes once they get there. Or if they're going to a nice event, they change out into nice shoes. Coat check does exist for a reason. At an old office that I used to work at, I kept 5 pairs of shoes under my desk. That way I had options and it saved me closet space at home. Now that I'm talking about it, I do have what I call commuter shoes. In the summertime, I wear sneakers going into the office and then change out shoes, and in the winter time, those sneakers become winter boots. So this is what I personally recommend when it comes to looking for a good pair of winter boots. First criteria is they should be warm, and lined shoes are warm shoes. If your feet tend to be on the colder side, then try to look for shoes that have insulation. At least in my experience, it's those boots with the fur that keep my feet warm. Secondly, you'd want something at least water resistant. So when you're out there in the wild shopping for shoes, you'll notice that there are 2 labels. There's the waterproof shoes and the water resistant shoes. Waterproof shoes, ideally, you'd be able to just walk in the ocean with them and your feet will still stay dry. But with water-resistant shoes, it can only handle a certain amount of liquid on its surface before it starts absorbing the liquid. If I had the option, I would go with waterproof winter boots. However, that really does limit your options in terms of style. So at the very least, I try to look for something that's water-resistant. Why? Because it gets really wet in the winter days here. Plus, wet feet is prime for blisters. So it's very important to keep your feet warm and dry. The next criteria to consider is that your shoes are slip resistant. Wet snow means slippery floors, and not all floors, sidewalks, and platforms in New York are created equal. Some will be slip-proof, others will not, so be prepared. The last thing you want is to fall or hurt yourself or drop your bag in a puddle of questionable liquid. Speaking of which, puddles here are deceptive. If you see a puddle at the corner of a street and it looks pretty shallow, don't be fooled. It may look shallow, but it's probably ankle deep. So try to skirt around puddles if you can. And of course, consider comfort. Everybody has different feet. Some need a flexible sole, others need a harder sole. Some have wide feet, some have narrow feet. Whatever your feet may be, it's important to understand what type of shoes you need. Because even if you have the most weather-enduring shoes in the world, if you can't walk in them, they really serve no purpose. And lastly, a good way to give your shoes longevity is if they are simple in style, so they don't go out of fashion. You'll notice that a lot of New Yorkers are fashionable in the sense that they have their own fashion style, whether you agree with it or not. But once that 20-degree temperature comes knocking at the door, fashion just flies out the window. I would take an ugly warm parka over the most stylish one on any cold day. But a proper parka doesn't necessarily have to be ugly. The key is that it's warm. Personally, I think the ideal proper parka would have the following criteria. First, it's Arctic grade. Buy one rated for Arctic temperatures, specifically somewhere in the 10 to 30 degree Fahrenheit range. Secondly, it has a windproof shell. A good parka insulates the cold and shields out the wind, so ideally you want one that has a technical shell and some insulating material. Feather down is extremely warm, but something to consider is that some companies are not very humane on how they source their feathers, so that's something to think about. Third, ideally, a water-resistant parka is useful. The shell doesn't necessarily have to be waterproof or water-resistant, but it's helpful when it's snowing. I know you can always just dust off the snow before you enter a building, but sometimes it's hard to dust off all the snow, so any snow that's left in the crevices of your weaved jacket will melt once you get into a warm building and you're just wet and it's uncomfortable. And lastly, when it comes to style, I personally go with something classic and simple with neutral colors. Ideally, it'd be nice to have something that will last for years and not go out of fashion and match most of the entire wardrobe that you have. For me, black is a safe bet because it matches 90% of what I have in my wardrobe. And you know what they say about black? It's the official New York City uniform. Yes, it's true. This is from personal experience, confirmed by the internet. Mittens are indeed warmer than gloves. Some people are fine with any pair of gloves or no gloves at all, and that's you. Kudos to you. But if you're like me and your hands get pretty cold, you might want to consider mittens. That's because your fingers together generate and retain more body heat than if they were separately insulated. And when it comes to accessories, not only are mittens a lifesaver, but so are scarves. And you'll notice once you're walking in 20-30 degree temperature and you compare having a scarf to not having a scarf, you'll notice the difference in how warm your body retains heat. So when it comes to accessories, at the very least, have some mittens and a scarf. And since your head is exposed, other accessories that I would consider are a warm beanie or earmuffs if your ears get cold. So now you have your winter uniform. You have a proper parka, proper shoes, you've got your mittens, scarves, earmuffs, beanie. What else? What else can you do to survive the winters in New York? Here are a few more tips. What I found really surprising when I moved here is that apartments tend to be very hot in the winters. That's right, a lot of homes here tend to be overly heated. Between city ordinances, the historical structure of some buildings, centralized heating, yada yada yada, you'll find that a lot of apartments here are ridiculously hot. And perhaps this is something we'll dive deep into in another video, so subscribe and hit that notification bell. While you may not freeze to death in your own home, you might shrivel up like a prune. That's because cold weather saps moisture out of the air, and artificial heating takes whatever moisture is left and deprives you of it. And dry air can result to itchy, scratchy, cracked, and bleeding skin, and also dry eyes. But a humidifier can help you through this. My humidifier goes through a gallon of water every night and another gallon or two during the day. Yes, that's how dry it is in the apartment. But while a humidifier is extremely helpful, the downside to it is that it gets dirty and nasty pretty quickly. I'm talking having to need to clean it every week. Fortunately, the water in New York is pretty soft, so you won't have to deal with the problem of calcium accumulation and scaling that happens to humidifiers used in areas where water is hard. But you do have to deal with mold and algae growth, specifically that pink kind that grows in the bathtub. My biggest tip for owning a humidifier is to get one that's easy to clean. Fancy humidifiers might have all the bells and whistles, but they might have a lot of parts too. And that's just more friction to getting someone to clean their humidifier. And it's not gonna be that efficient to maintain. I've been through so many humidifiers, and the one that I stuck with is this guy. And I have an affiliate link in the description below. While you can deal with dryness at home with a humidifier, what about dryness when you are out in the wild urban jungle? Hands are notorious for getting dry, especially when you're commuting and you're touching public doorknobs, handrails, elevator buttons. You're gonna wanna wash your hands a lot. And washing hands leads to dryness. And even if you just use hand sanitizer has alcohol, which doesn't do well in keeping moisture in your hands. So my advice is to just have hand lotion with you so you could avoid that itchy, dry, crack, bleeding skin. But nobody likes greasy hands either, so choose a lotion that's fast absorbing and non-greasy. The link to my favorite hand lotion is in the description below, and you might laugh at what it is because it's not your fancy hand lotion that you get at these boutique beauty stores. It's probably gonna be something that your grandmother had recommended to you when you were a kid, but I promise it works. And lastly, consider an umbrella in the snowstorm. Don't underestimate the power of an umbrella. I use an umbrella when it's sunny out, when it's raining out, and yes, when it's snowing out. Especially if I'm not wearing something that's water resistant or waterproof. Personally, I hate getting wet, so being out and about and it's snowing is so annoying because I can't dust off all the snow in the crevices of my beanie, my mittens, my earmuffs. What happens when you enter a warm building is all of that melts and I'm just uncomfortable and wet. So what I like to do is use an umbrella when it's snowing, and also it keeps the snow out of my eyes so I can see where I'm going. And of course, I have a recommended umbrella. Link to that is in the description below. Like everything I've recommended in this video, if you are going to buy it anyway, consider using the affiliate links in the description below. It really does help out this channel. Yes, New York can get really cold, but that doesn't mean you have to limit your activities and you have to limit your adventures. So if you like staying nice and warm in the winter months, hit that like button. And there are plenty of things to do in New York City during the winter months, especially during the holiday season. I have videos lined up to the tune of the holidays in New York City, so subscribe and hit that notification bell. As always, thank you so much for watching. Stay warm and happy New Yorking.